Hello, this is the Net Hero podcast. I'm Sumit Bose, and this podcast is all about business and doing better for the planet. It's not an eco podcast, we're not green warriors. We believe that business is good and business will make the difference, but it's about holding businesses to account. So if you're interested in what we're doing to try and make things better, to stop our polluting of the planet, to stop our global warming, to stop us driving around in cars that are polluting the air that we breathe, this is the podcast for you. It's all about business, it's about invention, it's about entrepreneurs, scientists, and frankly, there's a few wild cards as well. Do hope you enjoy listening to this episode, and make sure you subscribe and follow us on your social media platforms, and please check out our two news websites, energylivenews.com and Future Net Zero. On with the show. This episode is all about nuclear power. Now, you know, if you've been listening over the last couple of years, I'm a big advocate of nuclear. I know it's got its critics, but I think it has a vital role to play in decarbonisation. But also, let's be realistic, it takes a bloody long time. I mean, I remember I was about sort of 15 when I first did a story about Hinkley Point, and it's still not bloody happened, right? We were promised Turkey's being basted by nuclear power and electricity in 2017. Well, that's 8 years ago. So, is nuclear, having had all this big renaissance lately with the government committing to it, is it going to work? Or is it actually what the critics say, pointless, because the money involved takes too long? One answer is something called an SMR, a small modular reactor. But what are they? Will they work? Will they revolutionise our energy system? Today, I've got an expert who's not a nuclear scientist. She's an environmental scientist, but she's done her time looking at atoms. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Catherine Anderson from consultancy firm WSP. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, how are you? Thank you very much for having me here.
I'm very, very glad you're here because let's talk about this. First of all, quick idiot's guide, because I'm the idiot. Nuclear power, right? People have heard things like fusion, right?
Yes.
And people have heard of kind of nuclear reactors. So where are we right now? Before we talk about SMRs, where are we? Give us a quick potted history in a couple of minutes of nuclear power in this country.
The real golden age, if you like, were back in the 1960s, where we had the first big nuclear new builds at gigawatt scale that came in. And we've got those now, which are part of our aging fleet, if you like. So the existing Hinkley Point Bs, the Hartlepools, the Heyshams. And then we had the Renaissance now, which we have our Hinkley Point C and our Sizewell. So our new nuclear new builds, our gigawatt scales. And what we're seeing is that evolution. We're seeing how those sites have actually progressed from the 1960s to what we've got now currently being constructed, which is, incredibly exciting. And now the small modular reactors, or modular technology, because that also includes advanced reactors and also advanced technologies as well. So it's a really exciting development. And the main difference between the aging fleet and the Hinkley Point C and the Sizewell Cs is that they're gigawatt scale. They're large, they're plus 3 gigawatts, hundreds of thousands of homes that could be generated. These modular reactors can be anything from 5 megawatts, which may do a couple of thousand houses, up to a couple of hundred megawatts. So they're easily siteable. They're easily, they're modular in design, and they're easily siteable on smaller sites.
What's the difference between these and fusion? Because people have heard the government saying, we've got to do a lot in fusion, and a lot of money has gone to that.
Yeah.
This is not fusion, is it? This is fission, correct?
No, this is fission. So nuclear, these modular reactors are fission technology. The fusion technology is not nuclear per se. We do have a demonstrator site in West Burton at the minute with UKEA STEP, which is, again, an incredibly exciting opportunity as a demonstrator site.
So you've been to nuclear power plants. You've helped build them.
I have. They're amazing.
So if you can explain to us in a simple way how they work, because people have heard of kind of nuclear reactors, but I don't think most people know what that is. They might have heard of rods. So explain how it works, because it's got uranium. Most of them have got uranium, or is it other materials?
Yeah, there are other fuel types. These are extremely concrete-rich structures, and it's not your average concrete that you will have on a power station, for example. First, nuclear concrete is exceptionally important, and that is the foundation of the reactors. But outside of the reactor building, it's actually very similar to what you would have on a normal power station. It still needs ancillary buildings, it still needs workshops, still needs maintenance and O&M buildings and things like that, still needs welfare stores. All these things are fairly similar to what you'd have on a standard power station site, with the exception of the dome and what you see on a nuclear power station. But again, that's another really big difference between what you see at Hinkley with the domes, where you can see Big Carl putting the domes on the reactors. SMRs will be able to have a little bit more architectural flex around them as well, which makes them, again, because of the size of them.
Just going back before we talk about the SMR, the inside a dome of a reactor, what have you got? How do you make energy?
Oh, that is something outside of my domain.
Okay, sorry.
I'm a scientist, but that kind of aspect, that is definitely,
Okay.
I would love to get inside a reactor, but I haven't been able to do that just yet. I haven't got the security clearance of James Bond.
Yeah, we got the security clearance. Well, let's talk about how they work. So basically, they take a power source, which is normally a nuclear material, and then they sort of, it heats, it basically makes steam, doesn't it? That's what most reactors do. And they use that steam just to turn a turbine like they've always done. So this is not really new technology, is it?
No, like I said, it's very similar to what you'd have on your standard traditional gas-fired or coal-fired power stations. It's just the difference is the fuel source.
So when you look at these things, and I've been to them, they're massive, they're huge, they take years to build, right? And I was sort of slightly taking the piss, but it is a long time. And Hinkley Point C is still nowhere near ready to do it. Hopefully in the next 2 years, they reckon. But anyway, putting that aside, the big criticism of nuclear is it costs a lot, it takes a lot of carbon because you have to build all the concrete, and it takes a lot of time, as we've seen. And then you need to subsidize it, through these things. So how do you, having worked in it, how do you address the people who say it's a folly to do nuclear?
One of the big benefits of SMRs is the scalability, and it's also the standardization. Once you've done one, you can replicate it, and that's where the cost savings actually come in. And when you look at the plans of Rolls-Royce and others, they are looking to do a fleet approach within the UK, and we can see that there are other memorandums of understanding across the globe now for Rolls-Royce technology, which again is based on the water-based reactor that's in Hinkley Point and and Sizewell. But the benefit comes from the fact it's a fleet. It's standardization of the buildings, and you can dress it up and paint it pink if it suits the environment and the landscape it's in, but you wouldn't. But that's where the benefit, that's where the economies of scale come in.
So the ones that we've got now, you call them, what do you call them? Just large? Or
they're gigawatt scale technology.
Right.
Yeah, they're gigawatt scale.
So those things, we need a few of them, but frankly, you're saying that won't be the way to scale.
The lessons learned from Hinkley Point, given it is an EDF, projects, there are lessons learned that have been learned from Hinkley Point to Sizewell, around things like the cooling waters, the layouts, the sequencing. That's all been fairly well documented in terms of that. You kind of want the Goldilocks scale. It's too big, it's too small, it's just right. Yeah. And those kind of lessons learned have been used on Sizewell. There are obviously site specifics. They're very different, two different sides of the coast, different environments they're in, different social kind of constructs. But, at the end of the day, those lessons have been learned. And should we have had further gigawatt scale, whether that be at Wilver, Bradwell, Moorside, wherever, again, those lessons would have been learned.
So you think they would be quicker if we build that? So Sizewell C should be quicker to build?
Yeah, Sizewell C should be quicker to build. Obviously, it's got its own complexities and what have you, but there are definite lessons to be learned, definitely.
So an SMR, is it just a big reactor just made smaller, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
It's scalable. It's scalable technology. It still has a nuclear fuel source. It still requires nuclear safety regulations, which apply whether it's 3.2 gigawatts or 3 megawatts, there was still a lot of safety protocols which have to go into it. But you're right, it's a smaller scale. And, some of these sites like Last Energy, for example, can fit on a football pitch. When you compare it to the size of what you see at Hinkley Point, it's very different scales.
How small could they go?
The nuclear reactor was 6 by 6 meters, lead-based. So
Wow.
again, there are opportunities. We think of SMR being nuclear power in an energy generation sense, but there are plans in other reactor technology providers who are looking at putting. We know that nuclear submarines exist. We know that has been used in maritime sort of applications.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, you forget they're nuclear reactors. Yeah.
Exactly. So, there are opportunities there for other types of maritime transportation, So the SMR in terms of modular technology is not a new thing because we've used it in submarines, but it's this exciting new opportunity in terms of energy generation because it means that gigawatt scale reactors or projects need space.
Yeah.
And we've got a national-wide policy that have allocated those areas to be developed for nuclear deployment at gigawatt scale. The beauty of SMRs, you can put them in other areas which can be aligned more to decarbonize hydrogen, for example, or pink hydrogen, so there is oodles of opportunity to deploy them in a safe manner because those nuclear safety regulations still apply.
Yeah.
But there are other opportunities to take them to areas that are currently not nuclear legacy sites.
The truth is, not one of these has actually been built, have they? There's been concepts and things.
There's big concepts. There are plans in the UK. Last Energy have been very public with their site down in South Wales. We've got Community Nuclear Power, who have got their site in Teesside. We've got Rolls-Royce, who will either get Oldbury or Wilver, depending upon which way the British Energy Nuclear decide. But there are, in Canada, for example, there's really established proposals for modular technology. What's interesting at the minute is that there are just as many races to deployment in other parts of the world. Like the States have just revolutionized and completely changed their consent and permitting regulations they've had a similar competition that we have had for SMR deployment in the States. Canada has already got sites ready to go. We've got Finland, Sweden, all updating their nuclear national policy to spearhead and facilitate new nuclear modular reactor deployment.
Let's say they're small, right? Let's say they're the size of a bus, right? If you own a nuclear cell, you can build one the size of a bus, right? So you could have it near a data center, which is what people have talked about. You might need it for
exactly.
You could have it on the outskirts of a city and doing that. The problems would be people go, I don't want it, right?
Very true.
Seeing the amount of planning regulations that these big things go to. So how do you convince? I don't know. Would I want one at the end of my road if it was the size of a bus? I'm not sure I would. I think my neighbours wouldn't for sure. But, even if I say, hey, that's clean energy. But how do you think the public, because I don't think anyone really knows about this, let's be honest. So how do you convince the public? How do you convince councils? How do you just convince society that hasn't had in this country particularly, and even globally, a warmth towards nuclear? They've sort of tolerated it. Whereas in France, it's been part of the infrastructure for many years. How do you convince them that these are not going to be harmful or scary?
It's a great question. And it's one actually that probably isn't just solely around nuclear, but I think nuclear has the ability to heighten community anxiety that little bit more, as you rightly say, because of sort of like legacy perceptions and things like that. So, it is something that is very acutely aware of. We're aware of that. And, we are helping clients to navigate that. One of the quickest way to do it is early engagement. The National Policy Statement EN7, which is due to come out in the next couple of months, is very, very clear on the siting criteria that all vendors have to satisfy in order to demonstrate nuclear safety. And one of those is semi-urban demographics, which demonstrates emergency planning for siting of both gigawatt and modular scale reactors in relation to areas of population density.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? If you're going to do this properly, they've got to be near where people live.
Yeah, exactly. But, you look at Heysham and Hartlepool, and they're in areas of quite high density. You look at parts of Hinkley Point C now, where they've actually put a lot of the worker accommodation around, and there has been an increase. So you look at parts of our UK where we do have an aging fleet, and you look at the growth of demographics and housing and growth around those sites, and it's not been a barrier to deployment. But that being said, in order to gain that community buy-in, if you like. It's about demonstrating that safety. And that's the first real key aspect, is going, we are siting these appropriately to manage nuclear safety should there be, in a very unforeseeable event, something happen. And that's a key bridge. Early consultation, we are seeing an increase in willingness to explore and understand more about SMRs and other modular technology, which is great to see in the public. But it will always be something of, well, do I want this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's never going to be in the middle of a city centre, for example. But
right, okay. Thank God for that. One in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. Yeah. But,
I mean, we've data centers cited alongside is a perfect example, and yes, there are plans for those. But there's this tension at the minute, as there is with any type of major infrastructure, that there's all, we don't want the lights to go out. We want to get to A to B easily, but we also want new housing, and it's something's got to give. And the way in which the SMRs do that is to demonstrate through the siting criteria of the National Policy Statement and through the nuclear controls, we are right to be here.
What do you think the benefit of this would be if you were going to say it's all wonderful, right? 5 years from now, we've all just gone pants to this, build away, and everyone's happy, right? And there's a couple of SMRs dotted around major cities. What are we going to get out of it?
So less reliance on fossil fuels. Obviously, that's the whole point. We can hit our clean energy targets for 2030. We could be decarbonising large parts of our northern powerhouses, the Humbersides, the Teessides, the areas in which are, we're seeing a resurgence of hydrogen and carbon capture, for example.
Yeah.
In the US example, that in their competition, they've actually cited a 5 megawatt reactor next to a military aviation base, which is powering that aviation base. We could be seeing things like that, which is, a really key evolution. So with all of it, it's part of the clean energy mix. It will act as our base load, whereas, we've got all the offshore wind and the solar, which is very, very weather dependent and what have you. But this is about giving us clean energy base load.
Waste. It's always the issue.
It is.
Where the hell is going to be? Right now, nuclear waste has to be very strictly managed, and it has to be very carefully disposed of.
Yeah.
These things are still nuclear reactors, right? They're still going to have nuclear waste. How long do they last? This is what people will be asking, because most nuclear power stations, they say 40, 60-year lifespan, maybe more than new ones. Yeah. But these things, I'm assuming they don't last that long. What's the plans?
Probably the same. I mean, we've looked at we've looked at Hartlepool recently. That's got life extensions. Torness has had life extensions, and they were built in the 1960s, 70s. So I think we're looking at the same timescales. That's 60 years. So with anything, it comes down to good maintenance, the availability of fuel, and obviously being contained within the strict nuclear regulatory controls. But these have as good as any contribution, if not more, to base loads, because your average offshore wind is, you're still looking at 30 years for that, solar farm, 25, 30 years. So again, these provide that legacy sort of base load for us.
In your analysis, how long would it take to build one? If I said, right, build one in my garden for me tomorrow, Catherine, how long before it's running? Is it years? Is it months?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is years. Because ultimately, again, it comes back to the safety protocols. You want that first nuclear concrete to be absolutely spot on. And again, you're beholden to the weather on that one. But it's the same with any sort of requirement to make sure that it's built appropriately. So yeah, you're still looking at, maybe 5 years to do something like that, but it could be less. It completely depends on the scale and nature. I can't remember off the top of my head what Rolls-Royce were looking at, but a smaller site like Nucleo or LAST, or community nuclear power, you could be talking single digit early years.
I mean, that sounds still a long time, right? If you look at it for the public, if we're going to decarbonise, if you say, say the first one's up by 2030.
Yeah,
maybe the next one is 2033 or whatever. I don't know. I assume it will get faster as you learn to build it.
It gets faster, yeah, exactly. With the fleet.
But that's still 5 years, right? Say roughly, okay, maybe 7 or 8. Then the next question is it worth it? Because if it takes 10 to 12 years to build a normal big one,
and
it's still taking you 5 to 7 years to build these little ones, Why bother?
Well, we're going to have a gap. But, we're going to have our aging fleet being decommissioned around about the same time that we need these SMRs to come online. In addition to HPC and Sizewell as well. We've got, you take the average offshore wind farm, you're still looking at between, 5 and 10 years, depending on the size of that.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely with the planning. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is comparable, but with with SMRs, it is that scalable approach. You get a site big enough and you prep the entire site and then you deploy in sequence. So it's not like everything. And again, that's the big difference between the gigawatts or even a coal-fired or a gas-fired power station. You're generating it all at once. These can come on in series.
Could you foresee the other side of it, which is actually these are the last few big ones that we build? And then what you do get is a big plot of land, and you go, right, one small SMR, then you add another one a couple of years later, and they eventually become like loads of them, like little batteries, and you've got the same sort of power as a big one, but in less time. Is that another concept rather than the ones just dotted around, or does no one really know right now?
It's all part of the mix. Sites like Albury and Wilver, they could be up to, the latter ends of hundreds of megawatts, once you get a couple of the bigger modular reactors up there. But, this is where the smaller based ones, the ones like Last or X Energy, like we've seen, like Centrica have also signed agreements for, they're all a couple of hundred megawatts. And I think we need that balance, because when we have spikes in the grid, we don't want 3.2 gigawatts loaded straight onto the grid. We might want a couple of hundred megawatts, as various, there's a crisis on EastEnders or something like that, where we have I don't watch EastEnders, but we have a small spike, and where we've got offshore wind wouldn't be able to do that, pump storage wouldn't be able to do that, so it's kind of this is where the littler reactors can help to balance the grid out.
One of the other parts, so like I said, I caveat with this, I think it's a good idea, but there are critics who say this is pants, because we could just do this with batteries, right? So we could build loads of big batteries, then you get rid of the intermittency because you've got so much wind, and then why don't we do that instead of building these costly and at present unproven SMRs? How would you respond to that?
Well, with batteries, you need solar and you need wind. So, it's a symbiotic relationship. But yes, you could do it with batteries, but what are the batteries going to be supplied from? So it's all part of the energy mix. I mean, we can't just rely on one thing. And what I would say is that, SMRs represent some really good homegrown technology. These are things which, with Rolls-Royce, we've seen go from submarines to SMRs. It's that natural evolution of what we're actually doing. And it's a very, very exciting prospect for the industry. And it's not just the likes of Rolls-Royce, it's private developers coming through as well. So we're seeing that resilience within our nuclear legacy, where we've got sites that are going into decommissioning, where we might lose that knowledge. We're seeing that being brought back, and inspiring the next generation of nuclear engineers and construction specialists to come and actually build and operate these types of facilities. So that would be my answer to that. Basically, there's a slightly different mix to it.
Yeah, I get it. Before we go, a couple of points I think that need to be done. Skills, right? Now, as you said, most of these things were built 50, 60 years ago. A lot of those scientists have retired or, passed on or whatever. Have we got enough skills? Because every day we run a story saying skills shortage, and as you said, if these SMRs are going to be built around the world, there aren't many of those scientists, and they'll go, well, I'll go where the money is.
Yeah, it's a systemic problem across multiple sectors. But what I would say is that I'm seeing a really good transferable knowledge that is coming from other sectors. Like I cheat on nuclear, which is my favorite subject, but I cheat on that and go work on offshore wind, floating offshore wind, or other sorts of major infrastructure projects. And there is a lot of transferable learning across that. Right. Obviously, the nuclear physics aspect to it is a very, very key role in all of this. But with everything else, good construction knowledge, good kind of consenting knowledge, permitting.
It could be built from oil and gas or something.
Yeah, exactly. It can all come across.
Yeah.
And I think think that the likes of the Nuclear Institute Association and the NI, they're doing an amazing job in actually, really inspiring STEM and early years practitioners coming through. We've seen really good and actually very well thought out apprenticeship schemes that have come through the likes of nuclear restoration services and Sellafield and the NDA, so it's all part of the bigger picture. Skills wise, though, is also a big issue within the regulatory and consenting aspects. We are seeing shortages of resources there. We are seeing constraints in terms of resources, but that is not just a nuclear issue. That is a major across the UK issue.
If you look at the last, I don't know, probably 3-4 years, it has picked up. Definitely, governments are now putting some money into it. B, I think there's been a shift. I wouldn't say a massive shift, but there has been a shift in public attitudes, perhaps. And C, the driver for net zero. So putting them all together, is this, people are calling it a renaissance, which I think, but anyway, whatever. But do you think that actually there's more of an acceptance that we will need nuclear in our future coming?
I think you're right. I think there is. But with that is still the challenge of getting accepted. I think it's every scheme on its own merits. These projects will not be special. I mean that in the nicest sense.
No, I know what you mean.
They will be treated the same way as any other major infrastructure or power generation project. They still need to demonstrate acceptability to the environment. They still need to generate social value. They still need to enhance the environment biodiversity net gain. So these will be treated in the same way as others. But I think the benefit of SMRs is around that fleet approach, is around that standardization. And there's a real opportunity to align itself to decarbonize, which again creates a symbiotic relationship with those and establishes those industries as well. When it comes to communities, again, it comes back to every project on its merit and where it is in that social sense as well.
Yeah. They do come with jobs. I mean, that's the other thing. They do come with jobs.
It comes with jobs, but it's not just the construction phase, it's the operation. It's also the social legacy that these leave behind as well, especially if they're aligned with data centers, like you mentioned, and other types of those kind of projects. So I think, that's definitely where their benefit is.
Looking at it, how long have you been in the nuclear sector?
Around about 15 years now.
So is this a period where you think, there's been some false dawns? I don't want to put it, but there has been, right?
Yeah, no, I've been there. I've worked on nuclear projects that have not, I've worked on more sort of rival that haven't gone ahead and what have you. So yeah, I get that.
So how confident are you that you will see SMRs within the next 10 years?
I'm fairly confident that we're going to see SMRs. I've got a lot of friends in the industry. They're all incredibly excited. There's some really, we could listen to Ed Miliband, talk about this, the golden age of nuclear, but I've really seen interest. And I mean that not just from the nuclear industry, but also within government. Like last month, I gave evidence to the House of Commons on EN7 and how that is going to be implemented. My colleagues are involved with the Nuclear Regulatory Task Force, for example, so there's a lot going on. And we see cycles. We see when the flavour of the month is onshore, offshore wind.
Absolutely.
Now is the time for SMRs. And I think, we're due a decision about which site Rolls-Royce will go into and where the second site will be, or second vendor will go for the second site. So I really do believe we are going to see an SMR in the next 10 years.
Will it make our journey quicker? And that's my final question, because people are talking about net zero. You've seen all the latest, which is, we tried to go too fast, too quickly. The cost is enormous, and there will be a cost to this. But if you get private money, you get government backing, you get public acceptance. The one thing these things can do is they can give you a lot of power quite quickly compared to, wind farms and solar, even though they have a big role to play. So do you think if we accept and we back nuclear, you could speed up the progress to decarbonisation?
I do believe that, yes. I know we talk about SMRs, but there's still equal weight to gigawatt scale as well. I mean, all the focus is on SMRs, rightly so, because, their ability to deploy in non-nuclear areas or designated areas. But, we could still see gigawatt scale, at Wilver, for example, which again would be another significant contribution to that decarbonisation. So, yeah, I really think they would.
You seem excited.
Do you know what? It's been amazing to geek out on something like this. I am genuinely excited about working in nuclear because, it's a great bunch of people. I really enjoy my job. And, I think right now is one of the best times to be involved in nuclear power.
Good. Just don't let Homer anywhere near the bathroom.
Yeah? I'll eat the donuts, but I definitely won't.
Yeah, no, exactly. Catherine, thank you so much for your time. Really, really good chat. Thanks a lot for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you.
Tell us what you think, audience. Let us know about your thoughts on nuclear, whether you think this is the way to go. My thanks to Sohi for this week's production. Remember, get in touch if you want to be on the podcast. It's nethero@futurenetzero.com, and please subscribe and share.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from futurenetzero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. futurenetzero.com. Better business, better planet.